Always enjoy it when people clap before I do anything. It's very, very reassuring. It's a little bit encouraging. Yeah, Brian just briefly mentioned the fact that this is an interesting story for a number of us because we're interested most of the time in the 18th or 19th century, and this is one is a 20th century one, and it's a period of time in Irish history from 1900 to 1925 that was very difficult. And you're going to hear the story in three parts tonight. First part, Joe's going to give you a really good perspective of what was going on in Ireland at the time, from 1900 to 1925, to give you a sense of the turbulence that was going on. Then I'm going to talk about specifically, well, the turbulence over there. Why are we interested in here? What's the connection to Quebec City, and what's the connection to Sillery in particular in this case? And what's amusing to me is that this all came about, literally, we stumbled upon the story during a conversation between Mark Hughes and myself and Joe, and we just delved into it. We found a whole pile of information that we did not know. So we're going to share that story with you. And as Brian mentioned, we have a special guest tonight, and another special guest waiting to get a copy of the video in Ireland. So I'll talk a bit about these gentlemen in a few minutes. So again, the second thing that this is a bit different for us. Most of the time you have a speaker come up here and we blurb our story and you sit and listen very politely. Tonight you have to listen to three of us. So we're going to hand pieces off, so hopefully we won't screw up. Right? So we'll start off right away with Joe, and he's going to give you a historical perspective, and then I'll be back in a few minutes. Joe?
What you see on screen is a picture of the Galtee Mountains, which Tom Sloane would have seen as a child. Tom Sloane, as you see, was born in 1896, and I'm going to give you, try to put you into the context of Irish history of the time. Mind you, I'd say Tom only have become more and more aware of the divisions that surrounded him when he was about 12, 13, 14. Now, everybody knows it's a long way to Tipperary, but I thought I'd try and situate it for you. Tipperary's in the south of Ireland. I want you to, it's landlocked. I want you to notice it shares a little border with Cork, biggest county in the south, because Tom came from around here, just over the border in the Clocheen Union area. Tom's Ireland, into which he was born, in a lot of respects was divided. And the theme of my little talk, if I do 20 minutes or so, is about the divisions that the Irish were living. In the 1880s, there was a movement for home rule led by Charles Stewart Parnell, very capable politician who was able to use the Irish members in the British Parliament to frustrate British government and force them to consider home rule, just to manage to get legislation through by filibustering and talking forever. And he was quite successful at that. Unfortunately, Mr. Parnell got into a liaison with a married woman. Her name was Kitty O'Shea. That was her married name. Actually, she was an English woman. I forget her maiden name. It doesn't make much difference anyway. And unfortunately, Victorian morality at the time, which was deeply embraced by both the English and the Irish, particularly the Irish clergy. Once it became evident that Parnell had this liaison with a woman who was already married, Parnell was already married too, for that matter. This led to a split in Parnell's party, a very, very bitter split. You should understand that behind the Parnellite party, there was always an underground, the Irish Republican Brotherhood, who had a kind of working arrangement with Parnell to the effect that if you can do this peacefully, the more power to you. But if you can't, well, we'll do what we can. And in the meantime, if you need any muscle, we provide it. So by 1890, 91, 92, the Parnellite, the Nationalist Party in Ireland was very, very divided. He had managed to get a Home Rule bill into the British Parliament in 1886, and again in 1893, but both times it passed in the House of Commons, it was vetoed by the House of Lords. The Lords at that time could stop legislation, period. So, whereas the Parnellite Party had been allied with the Liberal Party, the Liberals got out of power and the British Conservatives came in, and the British Conservatives were more allied. Well, the Conservative Party became known just as often as the Unionist Party because they were backed so much by people in the north of Ireland who did not want to see Home Rule. They referred to Home Rule as Rome Rule because they were very Protestant in their outlook, and they didn't want to see the Catholics take over the island. So the Irish Parliamentary Party was fractured. It lost unity, it lost drive, and things were in the doldrums up until about 1903. 1898 was the 100th anniversary of a big rebellion in 1798, and the Nationalists seemed to get their act together again under the leadership of a guy by the name of John Redmond. At the same time, the Gaelic League had been founded in 1893, and the Gaelic Athletic Association had been founded back in 1884. And I mention these two groups because, as you see, Sinn Féin was founded in 1905, but all these groups, particularly the Gaelic League and the Gaelic Athletic Association, were infiltrated and largely controlled by the Irish Republican Brotherhood. That was their modus operandi. They would infiltrate a group and come to control its governing board. Now, in Tipperary, things went along quietly. What the British Conservatives tried to do was buy out a lot of land from the landlords and gradually give it to Irish farmers who had been tenants. So the ones who do get land are very, very pleased with this. At the same time, it strengthens their nationalism. They see they actually have a piece of land now, a stake in Ireland. As I say, the politics in Tipperary, as in the south of Ireland, are nationalist. Behind John Redmond's parliamentary party, but Tipperary had a long history of armed resistance against the British presence, and the IRB was strong in Tipperary. And so, of course, with the Gaelic League and the Gaelic Athletic Association. Now, the Liberals win in 1906. So they depend on Redmond's MPs, all of Redmond's MPs, all the MPs in Ireland. And remember, it's the supposed United Kingdom. The Irish, the MPs for the most part, will back the Liberals, and the Liberals would be in trouble if they didn't have that backing. At the same time, so people are hopeful again for the workings of the Nationalist Party to achieve home rule. Younger people are more enthused with this new party founded in 1905, Sinn Féin, which is more Irish, still more Irish nationalist, and espousing the aims of the Gaelic League to revive the language. Tipperary keeps sending back solid Redmondites majorities. The land reforms had given stability, bred new confidence among the farmers. As I mentioned before, people have land to defend and a nation to imagine. The third Home Rule crisis is when the Home Rule comes again. The Liberals and the Irish nationalists know that they can get a Home Rule bill passed as many times as they want in a British Parliament, but the Lords will always veto it. So what was necessary was this Parliament Act, which they brought forth, and that eliminated the Lord's veto. What happened after that? They brought forth a Home Rule bill, and each time it would pass, the Lords would veto it again. But the Parliament Act put an end to that. The third time was, okay, they would override their veto. So although this process started in 1911, it only came into force in 1914. So time flies by. And the trouble is, although you had your Home Rule bill at last, it was a different Ireland. As you know, in 1914, World War I starts. But previous to that, as the Protestant majority in the 4, 5, 6 counties in the north realize that Home Rule is coming through, they start to organize and they arm. They import weapons. In January of 1913, and in November, okay, that's 10, 11 months later, the people in the south start importing weapons and set up the Irish Volunteer Force. So again, it's a different Ireland. 1914, World War I is about to break out. It's going to break out in August, and the North has armed, and the South has somewhat armed in response. The Irish Volunteers were drilling. It was a male organization, but the women wanted to get in on the action, so they formed the Cumanaban, which means the women's group, if you want. At the same time, in 1913, there had been a huge lockout in Dublin and of labor Labor had gone on okay. In response, there was great labor unrest, and the labor movement formed a small group called the Irish Citizen Army. So things were becoming very volatile. As the third Home Rule Bill moved forward, the Irish National Volunteers drilled openly in Tipperary, inspired by the promise of a Dublin Parliament. Unionist opposition was less visible than in Ulster, and national tension was deeply felt. Okay, and as I said before, the labor unrest reached the country. Railwaymen, agricultural workers, shop assistants began organizing, echoing Larkin's call. Larkin was a labor leader, followed later by James Connolly, and they were organizing the working class. The IV near the Cross Rifles is Irish Volunteers. The hat badge has FF on it. It's Fianna Fáil. It means soldiers of destiny. So it's obvious the United Kingdom is going to war with Germany. And what Redmond does, Redmond at the beginning, he tried to ignore the existence of the Irish Volunteers, but it kept growing. And finally he decided, I better get involved myself. So he went to them and he said he wanted to add 25 members to their board. They had a board of 30 already. And 16 of them were controlled by the Irish Republican Brotherhood. Redmond didn't realize there were 30. He thought there were 50. So he asked to have 25. He figured he'd be able to have control by getting in 25. So rather, the Irish Volunteers agreed to that eventually because they didn't want to see the movement split. Then war broke out, and Redmond made an announcement to the effect that the Irish Volunteers would be happy to join the British Army in defense of the realm. And of course, the proverbial stuff hit the fan when he said that, because a lot of the men in the Irish Volunteers didn't see that as their function at all. And they split. So you ended up with the Irish Volunteers and the National Volunteers. The National Volunteers following Redmond into the First World War. So what happens in, sadly, what happens in Tipperary is men join the British Army, some of them do, and sincerely go off to fight for the British Empire under the understanding, their thought, that by the time the war was over, Ireland would have home rule and everybody be happy. But that's not the way it worked. The IRB launched a rebellion in 1916, 2 years into the First World War, declared a republic. The slow rate of executions of the leaders of the rebellion over the weeks and months after turned Irish popular feeling very deeply against the British. In Tipperary, as I mentioned, men enlisted in Redmond at Redmond's urging. Enthusiasm soon waned as casualties increased. And as the British War Parliament, it was a coalition parliament, but it became, as time went on, the nationalists could see that the persona that made up the coalition cabinet became more and more and more unionist, and the Home Rule Bill that had passed was gradually being hollowed out. So in 1916, the rebellion happened. And talk about division. You had men who, from 1913 to 1914, in the Irish Volunteers who had been drilling together. And come 1914, and certainly come 1916, there were ruptured. Neighbors who drilled together, some would be in the British Army, and some would have, they stopped going to their ordinary places of drill, and they'd find a more secretive place and continue their training secretly, although some of them were under scrutiny. And of course, it was great hatred against the authorities who were scrutinizing them. Families with sons on the Western Front were torn, particularly after the 1916 rebellion, and as the population began to sympathize with the notion of a republic. Some people with kids in the British services could see the logic of that, might have even sympathized with that, but at the same time, their kid was at the front. In 1918, there was a general election in Ireland. In December, the war is over. Remember, armistice is in November. And Sinn Féin gets 46.9% of the vote, 73 seats. The Irish Parliament Party, 21.7. Keep in mind, it's also a nationalist party. So, as you see from the map, the electoral map, it's very, very, very strongly nationalist. The 73 Sinn Féin MPs refused to sit in the British Parliament and formed Dáil Éireann, the Irish Parliament. The British declared the Irish Parliament an illegal body and tried to arrest as many as they could, and some of them simply went on the run. After the election, the War of Independence began in January. Sillery, Tipperary, these men, big picture of Sean Tracy, Sean Hogan, Dan Breen is on the wanted poster, and Seamus Robertson, and with the guy in the bottom with the mustache. They ambushed a group of policemen delivering a load of gelignite, and they seized it. Some of the policemen were killed, and the war was on. The county, I should say, soon swarmed with flying columns. A flying column is a group of about, could be 12, could be 30 men who move on their own, who sleep in the rough, outside in fields or in dugouts, or possibly in a barn of a sympathizer. And they move very quickly, and they move very lightly. And what they did is they moved around the county, and they had a kind of an intelligence network. And when they could, they would ambush British convoys going through the county. And there were, as time went on, there were very few counties in Ireland that did not have a flying column or two flying columns. This went on to around 1921. There was a truce. There was a treaty signed. It established what is called as the Irish Free State. It did not establish an Irish Republic. The Irish Free State was in a political position somewhat like Canada's relationship to Great Britain. So, predictably, a good part of the Irish Republican Army refused to accept the treaty. Other members of the Irish Republican Army said, "Well, we got this much, and we should accept as much as we got, and maybe it will be a step to getting a republic later on." And unfortunately, 2-3 months went by, and they did not avoid a civil war. The 1st Tipperary Brigade, as elsewhere, many veterans, notably from the 3rd Brigade, opposed the settlement, seeing it as a betrayal of the Republic. Fighting flared in the towns of Clonmel, Carrick-on-Suir, and Nenagh, as anti-treaty forces under Chief of Staff Liam Lynch, Irish Republican Army, clashed with Free State troops. Lynch was killed in action in Tipperary's Knockmeal Down Mountains. Free State executions of Republican prisoners during and after the Civil War left deep scars, shattered loyalties, and a silence that lasted for decades. It was so bitter, people didn't like to talk about it. A lot of Republicans left the country because they were blackballed and found it very difficult to find a job. I'm talking about the period of 1926 to 28, 29. By 1925, civil order had returned, but the emotional partition within communities was almost as enduring as the physical one in Ulster. Very bitter feelings between Republicans and what they called staters or free staters. Steve?
Thank you.
I'm sure that's it.
He's trying to turn me off already. There you go. So what's interesting about that mindset of what Joe's just positioned is really a situation where the area in particular, South Tipperary, is in turmoil. Families are separated, lots of violence, and the years that Joe leaves, especially on this last slide, 1923-25, in a few minutes you'll see why those dates become important to our story, as well the story about the fighting around Clonmel, etc. And you'll see exactly where our friend Thomas was. So this is Thomas Sloane, and when we started chatting about this, it was really as an offshoot. Mark asked me a question about what I knew about him, and I said nothing because at the time I was going out with my wife, and he was an older gentleman, and all I got out of Thomas was, huh, right? And that was about, he had no time for me, and to be honest with you, I had no interest in him at the time. My interest was my wife, right? And but Thomas was there, and his wife was a lovely lady. But that's, so my friend Mark asked the question, do you know much about him? What can we find out about him? So we chatted with Joe, and Mark did some research, and I started looking specifically at this section of the presentation about who were the Sloanes, who was Thomas specifically. And it boggles my mind to think that when I hear about the Galtee Mountain Boys, when I hear about the revolution, I hear about the treaty and anti-treaty groups and the violence and the killings. Like Joe was very kind of talking about the violence. there's a lot of killings and shootings and people executions. And that's going around on this old general area. So our friend Thomas is living this, like he's in the midst of this. And to me, all of these, we call them the Galtee Mountain Boys, but they fought each other. They fought the English. It was just a real mess. And I can't emphasize that point well enough. And sort of, when you look at Thomas, you think, does he look like a hard man? He sort of looks like your uncle or your grandfather or your dad, right? Like he just looks like a normal chap that you would sit there. And somehow, he just didn't come across as a hard man to me. So why is he of interest? He was particular interest because the couple on the far right were a great couple that I did get to know. It's Patrick Hughes and Alice Sims, and those are Mark's grandparents and my wife's grandparents. So that's the connection. And Patrick, the gentleman on the far right, oh, and Sandra. Would anybody else like to be part of the family? So I didn't want to miss that. I'm sorry about that. And what's interesting is that the woman in the middle, the little lady, is Patrick's sister, and her husband is Thomas Sloane. So that's the connection. That's why some of us sort of knew him or were interested in hearing this story. So I started looking for who were the Sloanes, and I was fortunate because I had some help along the way. Normally when I'm doing something on some research on a murder or some silliness, you go to the archives and spend a lot of time. This one here, the archives were Irish archives, they weren't local. But I was really lucky because I had two major sources that helped me along with the story. And that in itself was a story, and I'll position that in a minute. But this is what I found. Here's a picture of Thomas's mother and father, Patrick and Margaret Kennedy, an older picture. And I used that picture. That was thanks to Michael sent me this picture, and I sent it on to Ireland looking to see if anybody recognized him. And then I found somebody in Ireland. And it actually ended up by being a first cousin of Michael's, which was really great, which helped the story. So the Sloanes lived in a place called Ballybeg. Ballybeg is a townland. A townland is like just a hunk of land with a few houses on it in the middle of usually rural Ireland. And it's in a town called Newcastle, or just north of Newcastle. Now, Newcastle, for anybody who knows the South Shore, Newcastle is about the size of Kinnair's Mills. Like, there's under 400 people. Like, it's not a very big place. But this Ballybeg is sort of out of town. But if you took a look at the census records itself, I've put people in green. So Patrick, the father, and then Thomas, and John, and Willem, and Bryda. I put them in green on purpose because we found evidence that they were active anti-treaty people, right? So they're fighting for independence, and then they're fighting against the Republicans, so the ones that actually ended up in power. So they're on sort of, in a way, they're on the losing end, right? But it just gives you a sense of who they were, and that's what the green is for. There's other brothers involved, Patrick Sr., and then Cornelius and a few of the other ladies who are not in green because I found no evidence yet that they were active in the actual rebellion. I've added two little things in blue just to position purposely my major sources. One was Michael, who kindly enough phoned me last week. He phones and he said, and I say, hello, and he says, I'm coming. I said, who the hell are you? Like, I wasn't sure who was calling. He says, I'm coming. I want to come and listen to the story. So he's come from Newfoundland, so I'm thrilled. I have not met the gentleman until now. So it's a real treat for me. The other person is Seamus. Now, Seamus is a Sloane descendant. His name is Seamus Hackett. And he's another gentleman about the same age as Michael. And he has been really instrumental as well with information as well. And I put the little plus sign there because I've been helped by his niece, who's the one that has some access to Facebook and email, where Seamus does not. And I'm really proud of my prime objectives of this was just to get information, but one of my secondary objectives was I've got Michael and Thomas writing to each other again. So it's great. So we've reconnected the family. So that's the family. And the last thing I'll say about Patrick Sr. Patrick Sr. was a really active chap and also a Gaelguddy. So he spoke Irish. The whole idea of when Joel was talking about the GAA and the Athletic Association, really important. The language became very much symbolic to them. So Patrick wrote and spoke both English and Gaeilge. So very much a big part of it. This is where the puzzle started. I got these two pictures from Michael one day, and the picture on the left was just a picture of a house, and it was marked where my father hid from the Free State, somewhere in Tipperary. Well, right away it tells you if he's hiding from the Free State, then he's anti-treaty. Right? That's the first thing. But it says somewhere in Tipperary. Well, Tipperary is sort of a big place. The second one is where my father hid guns after the truce, somewhere in Tipperary. So again, if he's hiding guns, there's a reason for it. It's a church. So my first quest was, where are these buildings? And I was lucky after some research, and I'm telling you, Google Maps are fabulous. So I guess that if they were living in Ballybeg, which was north of Newcastle and south of Clonmel, that I figured I would start on those roads to see if I could actually find the buildings. And I did, through Google Map, believe it or not. So the picture on the left is a house on Google Map, and the same thing with the church on the right. I found them by just going up and down. Don't ask me how long it took. It was quicker than a walk, but other than that, it was quite amusing. But I was also able to find out that the house on the left belonged to somebody named Esther Hibbert Boyle. And that was her house, and there's a story for her in a few minutes. And the second thing is the church is called Tullamoleen Church, and Patrick, we found out, had been a gardener there for over 40 years. So his son, if he was hiding something, probably knew the land fairly well. So that's the story of these two buildings. At least we now know where the buildings were. This next clue is fabulous. It's sort of an obit, but it's not quite an obit. It's about Patrick's passing in 1937. But if you look in the writing on the left-hand side, it's sort of hard to read, but the highlights are children, all of whom took active part in the Republican cause in Tipperary. What's interesting about the obit, it doesn't mention his wife or the 4 or 5 other kids. It just talks about the Republican ones, which include Thomas, William, John, and the woman Brida. So it's pretty cool. And the second thing, it says, his home sheltered Republican leaders on many occasions. So he was using his home as a hiding place. Again, as Joe described the area, when people were looking for people were hiding all over the place. So Patrick Sr. was very much on the Republican side. His heart was ever with the men who stood for freedom. If you look at the details as well, there's another mention that one of his grandsons was let out of the Curragh. That's one of the most violent places for anti-treaty people going. So there's Paddy McKenna, who's also his nephew, who was in the Curragh. So again, it gives you a true sense of the strength of where the family and where their allegiances lay. This is a picture of the Sloane house. So I can imagine with 8 or 9 kids, and you're hiding other people. That's a picture of the Sloane house, Patrick's house. And what's really funny is Seamus, in talking to me about it, said, I don't understand how they were able to live in there, never mind hide people. He said, and this is his word, there wasn't room enough to swing a cat. And I thought it was the funniest expression, so I wrote it down. I didn't forget it. So this little house is, again, between Clonmel in the north and Newcastle in the south. Joe mentioned Liam Lynch. When Liam Lynch dies in 1923, he's killed just outside of Newcastle, right near where these people lived. And in Ireland, after John F. Kennedy was president, you'd go into many houses in Ireland and you'd have a picture of John F. Kennedy on the wall, almost like a Sacred Heart or something. Well, in the case of Tipperary, Liam Lynch's picture's on the wall. So one day in a conversation with Michael, he says, I was at my aunt's house and I saw a picture of Liam Lynch on the wall. And I said, get it, like in my mind, really? So I asked Seamus, he said, oh yeah, and I have it. This is the picture that Seamus still has to this day. So Liam Lynch is a really important person. Still to this day, he's considered a hero in Newcastle, Tipperary. And there are annual commemorations because he died, he was shot 3 miles or 3 kilometers outside of Newcastle. So the picture of Liam Lynch to the family, first Patrick and then Ellen, his daughter, and then Seamus. Pretty cool. So who is this Mrs. Boyle, this fabulous house that he said that he hid on? Her name was Esther Boyle Hibbard, and when questioned, there's a fair amount of information about her. I got lucky on some sources. She was influenced by two brothers who had joined the war effort, World War I, came back and joined the IRA. They became anti-British, and she was very much influenced them. She was an active member of Cumanaban. Now, Cumanaban, she used this house as a headquarters for local IRA. There was scout work, there were dispatches. They helped hide people. They helped medical for some of their soldiers. A pretty impressive lady. It was referred to as Roxborough House. And in 1923, it was burnt out by the Free State. So therefore, very much targeted. She was understood to be part of Cumanaban, understood the importance, and they burnt out that house. Two of her daughters, Gladys and Olive, were also members. And why do I know this? In the process after the war, there was ways where you could ask for a pension to support your war efforts, regardless of what side it was on. And in her documents, when she applied, the names that confirmed that she had done all these things and had hit us are guys like Dan Breen and Sean Hogan and Patrick Dalton and Jack Lonergan. These are all major players in the anti-treaty side. So in my mind, it's the same house that Thomas Sloane is hiding in. Obviously, he would have run into these guys at some point in time in his life. There's little doubt about it. The second thing that was interesting is when it was burnt out, there was a dairy place, another loft in a dairy building in behind, and they used that to hide prisoners. So once again, pretty significant in the same site. And there's a video online that you can actually see where you walk up towards the house, and after the house on your left is this picture here. So again, Google is a magical tool for people wanting to do research. Again, the daughter's application for pension identifies the fact that this had been burnt out and they had been hiding in the dairy. And there's also a few amateur historians. So I think Thomas Hennessey's like Joe and I and Mark, just trying to tell a story. Hennessey has a story about the Roxborough House, which is consistent with this, and he talks openly about Breen and Lynch and Hogan and Ryan. Again, these are all high profile anti-treaty people, all hiding in this house. So again, the Sloanes are right in the middle of it. So a house divided. So then I started looking at seeing the house of the actual family. Who were they, what they did, what happened to them, how were they reflective of what was happening in their community. And this picture on the left is the oldest son, Patrick. And this is an AI, that little squiggle on the bottom right is an AI adapted. The picture, his actual picture we have, he looks a little bit older than that, so Mark cleaned them up for us. But that's Patrick. Now, when Patrick left, he went to World War I. So he's one of these guys who were enticed to go and fight for the Brits, and he was there for both World War I and World War II. What's interesting, so he played no part in the revolution. What's interesting, at the end of his life, when he came back to Ireland, and a lot of the neighbors didn't like him too much. So Seamus talks openly about him being in difficult times in the pubs because he was interested in talking about World War I and World War II. No one locally really was very much impressed with that kind of concept because they were on the other side. So a difficult situation. But here's a case where the oldest boy had gone and didn't come back. William, William again in the green, is one of the guys that's noted as being a Republican. After the war and after the War of Independence and finally the calming down, he just found it was too difficult to stay. There was too much attention to his former role, and he went to England and left the rest of his life in England. I found nothing on John, the other boy. There's some stories that he was in World War II. There's some, again, hints that he had problems with his eyes as a result of some injuries, but it's not clear, so I don't want to use that as factual, other than I haven't been able to track John. But our little revolutionary, I'm blown away by the fact that Brida was one of the people that was a member of Cumanaman. So when we said that the women were involved, not only are they involved, they're actively involved. Like some of them are involved in some of the conflict. They're helping people. They're hiding people. And the family tradition is Bridie was moving messages hemmed in the hem of her skirt, right? So getting messages from various people that are hiding, the flying columns that Joe talked about, she's actively involved. So this is what Cumann na Bán would look like. And Cumann na Bán is just a group. The words literally mean a group of women, right? That's what the name, that became the official name. So that's Bridie. And this to me was a classic, and I added this picture on purpose. It's not specific to the conflict, but it had so many keys of the discoveries. This is a picture that Michael had sent me, but he didn't know who was in it other than Seamus. And when I sent it to Seamus via his niece, they knew all the people but didn't have the picture. So everybody was happy with the picture. And what's interesting is Ellen, the lady in the middle beside the bride, is Seamus's mother, a sister to Thomas, and she's sort of like the matriarch. There's 4 of those children in there are adopted children, and she's the one that brought Patrick back, the guy who most of the locals didn't like. She brought him back because he was having difficulty. She's like the one everybody surrounded. So I thought that was a great picture. And on the far right was the other Sloane sisters. So those are Thomas's sister, the 3 on the far right, including Bridie in the middle of the far right. So so the picture was absolutely critical because it was a significant clue in our discovery. So part of the family also included Margaret, who sort of doesn't appear in any of the local lore, but in a comment that Michael had made to me very early on, one of our early conversations, said, I think Margaret was the one that convinced Thomas to come to Quebec. So Margaret was here in Quebec City and wasn't quite sure what happened to her. And the word was that she had a fair amount of money, lost it during the Depression, and then moved on and sort of lost her. And I was lucky enough, I found her, like she was here for a few years, went to Ottawa very briefly, and then I found this import document into the States. So she ended up, I haven't found her death records, but as late as the 1940s, she's still working as a house servant in a very high-end establishment to a Ziegler family in New York City. So that's a picture of her, and Mark will have a picture of her again, just to confirm. So I was able to get a picture of Margaret, get it back to Seamus and Michael to show them that at least we tracked her down. The second thing that on that slide is Thomas. So this, when I mentioned the 1925 date being important, if Margaret is already here by 1925, she convinced Thomas to come. Now this is when things starting to calm down at home, relative speaking, but people who are anti-treaty are probably not welcomed. So Thomas is one that leaves, and this is his document in, I think it's July, if I'm reading, yeah, July 1925. This is his immigration. He comes to Quebec on the ship called the Sonia. So Thomas is here thanks to his sister, and he's sort of left home. So this is Thomas and Anne Hughes early on in their married life. He meets her at a dance on Chemin du Huron and marries in 1933 and has Michael and Maureen and Anne and Agnes and 2 other children who pass away very young. He worked as a technician at the Quebec Power in Sillery, and he's buried at St. Patrick's. What's interesting to me in terms of Thomas's life is not only what happened to him, but what happened to the family. Today, to the best of my knowledge, after talking with Seamus and looking through records, there's no Sloanes left in the general area. So that Sloane family all left, right? The only Sloanes are indirect. They're through married, they're women. So the Sloane name you don't find is Ellen, and they're Hackett's. So this revolutionary and this Republican anti-treaty guy ends up in Quebec City. He starts a Canadian family and establishes himself and does well. He also went back to Ireland with his wife and son in 1967. So that's where Michael and Seamus actually met years ago, and they're reconnected. And in 1965 to 70, sometime, brother Patrick came and visited for a few weeks. Now, Diane mentioned she remembers them all getting excited because Patrick was coming from Ireland. So that's what happened to Thomas Sloane in that background, difficult time, and that's Thomas's story. But what's interesting is what we don't know about him, right? So given that we didn't know anything, and it's literally been a secret until tonight. This is his coming out story, you know? Like people have not known the story of Thomas Sloane, and to think that even for us in Irish Heritage, us to play with we're always playing with the 19th and 18th century. We very rarely talk about the early 20th century. So Thomas is our first link to it. So he's, as I said, this is the Thomas Sloane story. I hope to both Michael and Seamus, I hope the overview of your dad and make you feel a little bit more comfortable that we didn't totally screw up the story. And now Mark has something really, Mark's got another part of this exercise, and I think you'll be amused again for another reason.
Thanks. You can hear me now? Okay, that's good. I can hear myself, so that's good. So Steve presented facts. I'll present what brought the story to us there. So that's where it's coming from. Oops, sorry, I'm going up there. Oh. Okay. So it all started with my father. I grew up with stories of Tom Sloane from my father, so Frank Hughes. And my dad had a remarkable gift. He could read people really fast there, so he could read their motivation and things like that. Not to judge them, but really to understand them. So based on what my father told me, Tom was serious, almost distant. He felt that he carried a weight through his life there. So that was really intriguing to him there. So that's why we talked about him a lot there. Not that frequently, but it was kind of mystery there. So even later, living quietly in Sillery, Tom had a calm, intense, and fascinating way that my father was trying to understand there. But from small hint and conversation, my father believed that Tom had been involved in the Irish Revolution and possibly in connection with the IRA before coming to Quebec there, and even after coming to Quebec. And that's the part we don't know there. But Tom never confirmed and never denied to my dad there. But that's the part that spot a bit our intrigue there. But I'll talk about an anecdote that maybe help understand Tom a bit better. Again, it's through my father's eyes there. But you can hear the story, and my father was a kind of funny guy there. So the story is my father told me that reveals Tom's a bit seriousness and mystery there. So one summer, my father and grandfather and Tom was repairing the roof of the family home there, and Tom worked quietly in his overalls and really focused. My dad, that always liked to do pranks there, so he decided to test the mystery uncle with a joke there, and he nailed the bottom of his overalls onto the roof there board. So when Tom tried to stand, he couldn't move. So he understood that immediately that it was a prank, but he didn't like it at all. So he was very, very furious. So my dad had to hide for a week in Sillery, not coming home because Tom was looking for him there. So based on what we know from Tom, so that a bit brings the elements of my father being afraid a bit. And from that day, nothing happened to my father at the end of the story, but from that day, my father always kept an eye on Tom and whenever they were together there. So he was always checking himself there. So maybe one of the points is that those stories are not only family memories, but they offer also fragments of Tom's past in Ireland that was far deeper than he admitted there. So my father senses that he carried weight, something important from his past, possibly action during the Civil War, possibly ongoing IRA long after leaving Ireland. So we don't know that that piece we don't know, but we're going to trying to figure it out there. But Tom lived in Quebec exactly as he lived in Ireland, discreet, serious, and with a past that keep tightly guarded. So that's why we didn't know about the full story about that there. So that's some of those pictures I've created them because I had a picture of my father, picture of Tom. So that's one of the picture I've just created there. So I also created a few picture using AI there, so that maybe to put you in perspective. So the first one is that that's Thomas and Margaret in Quebec, probably in the first year that he was here. So I've just enhanced the picture so that's a bit more clearer from that perspective. So that's in Quebec. The second one is his sister, that we used the photo from what Steve was presenting before, but we put the face of his sister inside of the group there, so to give you a perspective how she could have looked like Bridget there. And also we did put Tom inside of the squad of the anti-treaty IRA. And I also did one that wearing his uniform in Tipperary there, so to give some look and feel of what it could have looked like in those times there. And that's Thomas and Annie there. I don't know if I add an animation, but I was able to bring them to life there, so I'm not able to make it play there, but I was able to bring them to life. I can show it later there. So that's pretty much our story that covered from the history and also coming to who was Tom there. So hopefully that we've... it started. So I tried to animate them. Yeah, I think I'll try. So that's it.
Joe's going to play a song called about the Galtee Mountain Boys. Mark and I are not going to dance.
Not going to sing.
And we're not going to sing. But Joe's going to do everything.
I came here just to see you guys dance.
Not shy.
I joined the flying column in 1916 in Cork with Sean Moyle, in Tipperary with Dan Boone. Arrested by Free Staters and sentenced for to die. Farewell to Tipperary, said the Galtee mountain boy. We tracked the Dublin mountains, we were rebels on the run. Though hunted night and morning, we were outlaws but free men. We tracked the Wicklow mountains while the sun was shining high. Farewell to Tipperary, said the Galtee mountain boy. We crossed the hills and valleys and over the hilltops green, where we met with Denny Lacey, Sean Hogan and and bring. Sean Moylan and his gallant band kept the flag flying high. A farewell to Tipperary, said the Galtee mountain boy. I'll bid farewell to old Clonmel that I never more shall see, and to the Galtee mountains that oft time sheltered me, and the men who fought for freedom and died without a sigh. May their cause not be forgotten, said the Galtee mountain boy. May their cause not be forgotten, said the Galtee mountain boy.
Thank you.